The reason why we came up with this as kind of the subject about for Lean LA is because we feel like an advertising company has a really different perspective on how Lean can actually work. And in general, just an advertising startup tends to have a very interesting view on how a startup needs to operate. And I'll get into a little bit of those differences then. But I guess first I'll introduce myself. I'm Rob Pham. I'm a founder and CTO of Sharethrough. And so before we get started, I just kind of want to gauge what the knowledge of the audience is like and kind of where you guys are. So maybe you guys can talk a little bit about kind of your background. You can shout out your background, what industry you're in, anyone?
Software engineering.
Software engineering. What verticals are you in? Anything like advertising?
E-commerce.
E-commerce?
Advertising.
Some advertising? All right, so yeah, I guess I just want to make sure that I hit upon the right things. What about Lean startup experience? Like, do you guys know what customer development is, MVP, like that sort of stuff?
Raise your hand if you think you're familiar with what Lean Startup means, I guess.
Okay. All right, cool. So I'm not going to do much of any of a 101. And then just before I start, are there any questions or any like reasons why you're here and things you want to get out of it? So I'll keep note and talk about it as I go through the slides.
We talk about online video with respect to how it's actually impacting marketing decisions from Madison Avenue.
Cool. Okay, we'll definitely do that.
Getting your first users, first 100 users, what the effective strategies are to pitch champions to companies.
All right. Cool. Yeah, definitely. Anyone else?
Does anyone else have any like specific problems they may be facing right now? Anything? You're all with it. Great.
Yeah, I got one for you. Navigating the ad agency brand relationship and a whole ecosystem.
Yeah. Don't have a slide on that, but I can talk through it because we know inside. Actually, I do have a good photo. Yeah.
Maybe how you come around your pricing when you're dealing with big companies on Madison Avenue. Say one thing to one company, and you have to work with different things.
Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, so if I don't touch on anything at the end, bring it back up, and I'll talk about it there. So yeah, because we're a small crowd, let's keep it pretty casual. If you have a question, just bring it up right then and kind of have a conversation right then and there. But so what I'll do now is I'll have Chris kind of jump up and tell you guys about what we do, so you have some context behind some of the stories I'm telling and kind of some of the explanations of kind of how we got to where we are. So I'll intro Chris.
Appreciate it. So I'm Chris. I'm Director of Marketing at Sharethrough. Previous to Sharethrough, I was at Google for close to 4 years, working in a variety of roles, a lot of it in the communication side, working with things from YouTube to Gmail and kind of the whole app suite. And previous to that, I was in New York. I was working more on the content side and helped some of the writers on Conan O'Brien write some of their interviews. Before that, I was at CBS Sportsline, did some interactive sports stuff. So, Sharethrough, guaranteed video views, maximize sharing. That's really what we're all about for brand videos. These are all brands that we've worked with in the last few years. So this is where we come in. This is the problem that we're solving. The time it takes to read this, over 36 hours of videos were uploaded to YouTube. So chances are, if you're a brand advertiser, you're paying attention, is that a lot of play is happening across YouTube. There's a lot of interest in creating more content, not just doing a 30-second ad, but actually doing something that engages your audience. But it turns out a lot of other people are doing that as well. So if you're Activision, you invested maybe $100,000, $500,000 in your video, it's really entertaining. It doesn't necessarily mean anyone's going to watch it because you're competing against the other 36 hours of video that were uploaded last minute. And that's where we came in. We guarantee views for brand videos. So that's been our promise from the start, is to figure out a guaranteed way to distribute advertising content, not as pre-roll, but as standalone content, in a way that can guarantee audiences. This is a solution that we've come up with. It's a suite of social video ad products, a video player that leverages the social graph to help encourage sharing. Scalable social publisher network, sites that will ideally help rise video to the top if communities are liking it through paid inventory, but also through kind of a network effect. Transparency, being able to kind of optimize with real-time data across the campaign to help improve the performance of the campaign, and also using data, a variety of methods to kind of target our audiences. So these three things, repeatable, scalable, and transparent, this is really not what's existed in the social web for content. You used to be able to just kind of put a video on YouTube, and if it was really interesting, there was kind of less competition, especially if you kind of invested in some public relations, you had a much better chance of your video getting some attention. As online video has grown massively, you have a lot more competition, and these things are really needed to be able to participate in a media buy. And that's really what's happening now. Viral video has essentially grown up to be like a real advertising strategy, but you can't put a media buy behind it without having these things in place. And that's essentially what we're focused on building out. It's all about the shared view. I really like this slide. It's actually a video that we did with Lego that we distributed that's really interesting, a perfect example of just like some awesome content that you can distribute on behalf of a brand and really be like an entertainment experience while actually kind of helping lift the brand. So anecdotally, we all know this, right? The videos that people shared with us is what we watch. Everything else, maybe not. The one thing that we know we're going to be engaged in and that we're highly likely to click on is something that's been shared with us, and that's not going anywhere. We know that anecdotally, but part of our company is really being able to track some of that. So this is a study that we did with one of our big brands and just try to see what happens with the paid placement versus when that same video is shared with people. So on average, the shared view is 3 times as long as the paid placement. Putting some numbers to the fact that shared view really is a lot more valuable in every respect.
That's really interesting. So you're able to track with your analytics where the view's coming from, obviously. So if it was like an ad buy with YouTube or some sort of sponsored page on YouTube versus people coming in to view the video on embeds, it's a little technical, but is that part of your solution, or is that readily available to anyone to be able to track that way?
So part of our solution is we track from it initially goes from a paid view, and then when the paid viewer has shared it, then we track once it's gone from that person out. So we track the conversion of paid into shared, and that's kind of the conversion rate. So it's kind of saying if you buy through us, you get a seed that's kind of artificial or paid, but then it kind of goes on to an external network that is shared, and those people who watch it even more engaged because
it's a personal referral.
Personal referral, exactly.
Okay.
Is the same videos? Exact same video?
Exact same video.
Yeah.
So a question, just real quick, and maybe you already answered this. Is the fact that it's a personal referral engaged? So if I get something for my wife, I say, my wife might be factoring editor or for me, and I'm going to watch.
Right. There's a whole psychology behind if it's been shared to me, I'm going to watch it either because that person has great content, so they always curate great content, I'm going to watch it, or it's like, why do they like this video? What's going on with this? And I'm going to watch it, or it seems kind of funny, so I trust the word, I'll watch it. It's all different types of mentality, but no matter what, in the end effect is the brand gets their message out to the world and get people to watch this piece of content in a way that's way more engaging than kind of what is handled in the paid way.
So I think he made an interesting comparison, like his wife sent him something. So as part of the higher engagement factor, because you're self-selecting the targeting, because people are making personal referrals, they know that Patrick would like this particular video, and that's why he's going to end up watching it. Isn't that kind of what this sharing is about?
Yeah, so you mean from us getting it to Patrick
from a second party to third party?
So from him, I'm lost.
His wife says, "Oh wow, this is a really cool video. Patrick would love this."
Yeah.
And that's almost like a very personal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we're trying to do is, part of our solution is trying to find a way to scale we do it, and eventually probably predictably get to that point. But until we kind of finally close the loop on it all, we can't do it predictably because we need to control the other side. Right now, the other side is kind of pushing into Facebook, pushing into Twitter, and the feedback back into kind of our analytics is all held to Facebook and Twitter.
So just so in case everyone's getting confused about what is Sharethrough, they're talking about shared videos, but they're talking about guaranteed, and obviously you can't guarantee sharing. So with that, we are about guaranteed video views. We distribute views across our network. We can track it, and we charge cost per view. But building out analytics and tools to encourage sharing and to be able to track for sharing, because this is where it's going. This is kind of that transition from social media being interesting to social media being a legitimate business strategy and being able to show the ROI on it. So I don't know if you are familiar, this is advertising. It is a viral video chart. This is kind of a weekly chart that comes out each week with brand videos showing how they're performing, sort of a nice catalog of content advertising on the web. We actually have pushed more videos onto this chart than any company in the world by a pretty large amount. These are just some of the videos that we've kind of distributed over the last few years. You may have seen a few of them, all kind of like, all of these I think are really good examples of just kind of like the opportunity with advertising on the web. Pretty much none of these I think, almost none of them are you going to see on television. They're too long or too crazy or whatever. It's just like advertisers really embracing the opportunity within the web, within the medium, and the social, the interactive possibilities to really be able to open up this whole new, much more creative, much more kind of interesting advertising medium. And that's really what we are about, is helping kind of these guys succeed, be able to, they can guarantee the views, and their job is to make it as creative as possible. Versus trying to figure out, all right, well, what's I going to do YouTube? Who's actually going to watch it?
Are these like 3-minute videos?
It's actually a huge mix. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Scarface Go Play. That's actually a pretty long one. We should actually watch it at some point. That's really funny.
You have to show some videos at some point during this talk. I mean, come on.
That's actually a good one.
Here I am describing the videos. There's this kid.
Play acting.
Sorry.
So I was going to ask, so back to the form. So is this, in effect, a new form of video in terms of, this isn't just they're taking stuff that was built for the 30-second spot and repurposing it or spending, they're actually building, producing towards the medium that is kind of in part Sharethrough, right?
Right. Well, the medium is the internet, it's the web, it's
Right.
YouTube. I mean, everyone started, when YouTube came out, everyone was like, oh, we got to get on YouTube. What's your YouTube strategy? And the YouTube strategy was producing content that cost me $200K, $300K, and then uploading it to YouTube and being like, great, it's on YouTube, 1,000 people watched it. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. And then they go, well, we got to be able to watch it. And that's where we came in, and that's kind of how we solved the problem. And I have a great, I'll get into like a story of how that's how we actually got our initial strategy.
But sorry.
Oh, just a quick question. So, what do you guys do if it's just crappy video? What if the content that they're telling you that they want shared is crap?
So we actually will discourage them from working with us because we actually don't want them. If it is a bad video, like a 30-second ad, that's pure ad, we'll say, you're probably better off running pre-roll. You're probably better off using like Google AdWords or something and driving a landing page and doing something like that. But I mean, if they're insistent, we go, okay, well, we'll run our network. We'll give people to watch it, but there'll probably be no sharing out of it. And we tell them up front. And usually media agencies know when their brand has pushed out crap onto them. And they'll say, yeah, and we know, but we've been ordered to do it, so we'll do it.
I hope it's okay. We're asking a question.
Yeah,
Interactive.
right.
I think it's really fascinating stuff. So, question is: are you like strategically consulting these companies because you sort of cracked the code of viral, and obviously you probably know a lot of the best practices, and are companies coming to you and saying, guys, you've gotten more videos on whatever in the top charts. So how do we go and make it? Are you involved in the stage before they make the video? Or are you just involved in the distribution side?
We're only involved in the distribution side. We'll get involved in more consultation basis, only to help with the sale, and that's kind of part of the customer development that we're doing. It helps us get in, helps us to better understand what their pains are, what they need, what their goals are. So we like to get involved, but we don't charge for it. We don't aim for it. But it's all in kind of the customer development aim. Is we do it so that we know what their true goals of the campaign are. Because their goals might be listed out in kind of a contract saying, I want to get 1 million views. But they might have an actual goal that says, I want to get lots of editorial coverage and get it blowing up on the internet. That's not covered in the contract, but because we've kind of ideated with them, we know, well, let's just buy this on the side, editorial coverage for them. And we won't charge them for it. We'll make them like a hero. We'll make them love us. And by doing it, we win them over and we truthfully solve what their main goal was rather than just what the contractual goal was.
So it's not, it sounds like biz dev, but you're calling it customer development because you're helping them figure out their problems.
Well, yeah.
And you're trying to identify the problems clearly? Or
right. Well,
why do you call it customer development as opposed to business development?
Well, because in that process, when we're talking with them, we're learning about what their customer needs are. We're learning about kind of what their true goals of their campaign are. And by doing so, I think that's more customer development than business development. It's mixed at that point. I think that's one of the nuances with an advertising company is business development and customer development sit pretty much hand in hand because you got to do a lot of stuff combined. But I would put it more on the customer development side because this helps us learn more about the customer.
Rob, I don't want to totally derail this, but what are some of the most surprising things you've learned from having to do this kind of guerrilla customer development. Have there been any complete surprises out of left field that you were able to capitalize on?
Surprises.
I think we talked a little bit about this up in Palo Alto, where, I think you mentioned to me, for example, that, for example, ad agency has a model. They know it's not a great model, but they'll just kind of throw money into it anyway. Or, I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm trying to think about anything that talks about this in the slide that already talks about it. But I think that it's more of the concept that that ad agencies, they want to get into this new form of video advertising. But because it's a very old-fashioned industry, and they kind of operate in an old-fashioned model, and it's hard to kind of push a new metric down or push a new form of getting video views or advertising out there. One of the things that we learned through our early conversations is we have to kind of mold what we sell in a way that they're used to buying. So, they buy in the entire concept of like insertion orders. And they all buy based on like a million views
They're used to guarantees,
on my contract.
right? You can't make firm guarantees when it's sharing.
Right, and
that's a huge difference in how they're used to
Right.
doing buys, right?
Yeah, and if we went out into the marketplace saying we're selling shares, they'd be like, "That's great, love the idea, but it doesn't fit in my spreadsheet. So we'll save you for an experimental to buy maybe sometime in the future, and we'll never scale, we'll never learn." So one of the things we learned early on was, well, we got to figure out a way to fit within the way they buy. So then, when we're talking with them, when we're talking with kind of the higher level people, we can talk about the share and talk about the future value that we're providing and where we're trying to get to, and they all understand it. When we're talking with the media planners and buyers, the guys lower on the food chain, all they care about is they're kind of fulfilling the contract and fulfilling the spreadsheet, and we also fit that as well.
As part of the pitch, how do you sort of compare the return brand value of, say, 1 million views here versus broadcast, which is what they already know?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's that's the piece that I think we're still proving, and I think it's kind of, that's the reason why people just want to get into social media in general. There's been no kind of quantitative study that really proves social media is like 100 times more effective than broadcast, but people intuitively know they want to get into social media. I think part of what our problem we're solving is how do we prove that it is better than broadcast, and how do we prove that it is more effective? I think it's kind of like what we were saying before. Everyone intuitively knows that a shared view, if one of your friends tweeted about a video, you're more inclined to watch it than if you saw that same exact video, on the side of CNN.
I think the brand people on broadcast should be trying to prove why they're more valuable than social, because they're completely unmeasurable.
Yeah, I don't think that we are competing against that. Like in a lot of our conversations, this is kind of an experimental world, but it's growing like largely. So to these advertisers, it's more than trying to think about like, what's my best use of online video? Because I've seen all these success cases, so I know these companies have profited for this, because a lot of these are shared views, which means it was free, and it was endorsed, and there's actually no parallel to broadcast, right? I can't send you the link to it, and doing so, have the brand get a view that they didn't pay for and highly endorsed. That me basically saying this brand and this content is like, what's a greater sense of targeting than me sending it to my friend? That's the best, really the most accurate targeting there probably is when it comes down to it.
How does that differ, the conversation about broadcast media versus, say, online video and social media sharing for video? How is that impacted when we start talking about video email and having a broadcast mechanism that can be anything from email to text to Twitter as a mode to be able to let an audience know that there's video that's available, and then let the inherent nature of the social structure just allow them to be able to forward along on their own, as opposed to actually having to see it.
Well, I think what you're getting upon is the fact that the internet has now allowed for a whole new transmission of advertising, where you can have self-selecting advertising and people can raise their hand saying, I actually like this product, so I'm going to personally endorse it. I think there always will be room for the broadcast world and ways to broadcast out advertising. I think that there will always be a media for that. But I do think what the internet has provided is a new way for people to go to YouTube or go into some random discovery mode, come across content that's really entertaining that happens to be sponsored by Nike, and saying, this is really awesome, I'm going to share it with my friends. I think that's what's completely new about this case. And I think that's what social media is all, that's why people love social media, is is that new type of kind of volunteering to kind of sponsor a piece of a brand.
Yeah, but in this particular case, we're not talking about discovery of video. I mean, if Nike's going to be investing money to develop a video, and their intention is to let this thing go viral, right? So they want to have the seed planted in the best case scenario so that they can actually get a specific return.
Right. Yeah, I think, well, without being too deep into it, I think the main thing is, I think it's a way to get to the video, to get to some sort of viral video outcome in the most kind of scalable way to do it to date. Yeah, I don't think there is a, I think you have to use some of the existing paradigms, such as broadcast, video and kind of pre-roll, not pre-roll, but spreading it across and seeding it out as a way to achieve the end goal, which is kind of getting it into the network. Share that.
I think you're also, so you're seeing an evolution in terms of like the understanding of viral video, what it actually is, versus this initial understanding that it's sort of this like magical outcome of fantastic content. The reality is that there's amazing social potential across the web, and so the hard thing is just to get your content out in a broad way to like kind of give that social lift. So I think initially viral was just seen as untouchable by the advertising industry, happening on its own. And now it's sort of maturing into essentially what we're calling social video advertising, which is actually employing a paid media strategy, a somewhat traditional media strategy, to enact a viral outcome, essentially, to get earned media, which is sort of like now the term I think that a lot of advertising agencies are using to essentially replace the term viral.
Good. So where would I see your videos?
So they live on YouTube, but you'll see them in kind of a bunch of different social applications. One of the value props we provide is by placing our content in kind of very social environments, so that it increases the probability for someone to share it. So you'll see it in kind of some virtual games, you'll see it in some Facebook apps, you'll see it in just other social networks.
Can you share your top 5 sources of distribution, or is that something?
Sure. I mean, you'll see it in. So we're with a bunch of random independent social games. So like one is called Mole World. Another one is called. I think another one on Facebook. But there's also we also work with My Yearbook, another social network itself. We work with some video sites themselves, like Devour, to actually kind of drop in really cool content inside an already existing video experience. So we have a various...
Big, work with BuzzFeed, like a huge array of social sites. So it sort of comes down to how they want to target it.
And do you guys build any of these games yourself?
No, we're more of the platform and the distribution.
So how would you convince a customer to come and spend money with you rather than say going through some other route to those apps and games?
Well, that's getting more just like the reason why ad networks exist altogether. And we can talk about that, but I want to get on to the rest of the slides we have. So if there's, I guess, any more questions to clarify what we do, I'll get to that.
So
we can talk offline.
So I think what we're trying to focus on, and I'm not going to sort of try to control the conversation, but we're going to try to put it in the context of lean, so customer development, agile, and that kind of thing. And then we are here for 2 hours afterwards for more beer. I don't know if there's more pizza to get some more. So there's going to be lots of opportunities to also sort of drill into very specific topics.
Cool. Yeah.
Actually, I think I'll kick it over to Rob now. But
Sure. So this is kind of we've been around for about 3 years. We built up kind of a star team of kind of investors and advisors, and they've kind of really helped us. And as Patrick has mentioned, like helped us kind of get our minds around kind of the concept of lean startup and kind of the right do's and don'ts, and kind of learning from their war stories, so we can create our own war stories, and then kind of go from there. So I'm going to get into kind of a little bit about the roots of where our company came from, and that will kind of explain a little bit more kind of why we ended up at social video and kind of why we think this is kind of where our pedigree came from, essentially. So we essentially, my co-founder and I, we met at Stanford. There was a class at Stanford that was finally dubbed the Facebook class at Stanford. And the class was essentially initially about creating persuasive apps on Facebook. It kind of shifted into creating viral apps on Facebook, and it just turned into a straight-on incubator of companies and apps trying to build their own application and get lots of users. So from that, we learned a lot about kind of the viral mechanics on Facebook and how people share and what are some good tactics to kind of be more social and kind of help things. My co-founder, he also had done a viral video consulting business, and in that business, he kind of made a lot of headway, splashed a lot of waves with his TechCrunch post. Some of you may or may not have read it, but with that, he actually kind of built a lot of initial relationships with a lot of the big brands and a lot of the companies down here, which actually helped us kind of finally make our decision to go focus on kind of the advertising world. So I think a lot of the concept of like the lean startup framework is pretty new, but obviously there've been tons of companies who've been successful in the past, and I think kind of what we realized, we didn't realize we were doing a lot of lean stuff until we actually ended up talking to Steve Blank and Eric Ries, and they started kind of putting words to it and kind of putting it into a framework. So what I want to get into is kind of some of the first few kind of things that in retrospect kind of fit within lean. So the first thing we did was we basically built our first MVP, and it was an MVP that went in production and pretty much went viral. So we created this little app on Facebook called Hugs, and it was a really simple app. I literally spent 2 hours building it, and we just put it up, and I was like, sure, whatever. It was something will happen. It's more of an experiment. It was for the class. Next thing you know, within a week, it had like 1 million some odd users. We're like, wow, this is what's happening here. And then I was like, well, this was a really simple app. All it does is just you select users and you send them a hug, and it just invites them through the Facebook feed. Why don't we do this for kisses? Why don't we do this for all these other different verticals? And eventually, in about like 3 or 4 months, we had built like 70 different verticals, and we'd eventually amassed like a user base of 20 million daily active users. And that is an example of something like it's really complete unexpected growth, and kind of just like, we had no idea what fell in our laps. You're just like, wow, this is a lot of users. What do you do with this now? And that is not a typical case of most kind of companies.
What year was that?
This was in 2007, end of 2007.
So would you put that, we were talking earlier about the context of the Facebook bubble, and I'm not taking any credit away from you because this is awesome. But I just want to put it into context that if you want to walk away from here and say, oh, I could do that. Possible. Facebook really closed a lot of the viral marketing channels. I mean,
it definitely.
I think it's amazing.
I would actually agree that this kind of skewed my perception initially of like how easy product is to build. It's like, oh crap, it's so easy. You spend 2 hours, you get 20 million users eventually, which is not true at all. And I think it was because of the Facebook bubble that really kind of allowed for it. But what it did allow for was kind of the proof that, like, I think what I did learn from it wasn't that you can spend very little time and get a lot of users, but you can do something really dead simple and users will still use it, and this thing would go down all the time because like I just didn't know how to scale anything, and it's one guy trying to manage this massive scale. I'm there like reading on how to like optimize SQL servers and stuff, and just figuring it all out on my own and not really knowing at all how to do it. And it would go down, it would go up, it would go down, but it just kept on growing and people kept on using it, which means you don't have to have a perfect thing to get it out there and get users actually activated and doing it. It's very odd that a very simple app where you're just hugging people is actually enough to create this kind of user kind of reception where they keep on wanting to go in, but it's true. You can create something so simple, and if you're solving that one core need that's to the right audience, it works. And you can have something that kind of grows from there.
Have you been able to replicate something like this? What I mean by this is a good MVP when dealing with big corporations. It sounds great. Obviously, you're dealing with regular users, it goes down, no problems.
Yeah.
What happens when you're dealing with big companies?
Yeah. So this is for a completely different clientele. This is just random Facebook users, which is a big blob of like people who don't know how to use Facebook and kind of new to this. And so I'll go into my next one, which is a story about kind of from the advertising side, from the viral video business, how my co-founder ended up kind of initially breaking into kind of the Hollywood industry here. And essentially what he had done was he basically was solving a simple problem of like people want to get views on their YouTube video. So, so how do you do that? And he came up with some simple solutions, and based on these simple solutions, which was literally just as simple as maybe taking a video and then kind of posting it around the internet and kind of doing very on-the-ground editorial type work. But he was able to do it in a way that was effective enough so that he could kind of solve people's goal, and then he would go out and then kind of, and from there he kind of make them succeed. And so one of our greatest wins that we ever had was we essentially worked with a major kind of Hollywood company here. One of their marketing managers literally just Googled us and found, like, he was trying to figure out how do I get views on my YouTube video. So he found us, he started talking with us, and it was really simple. We were solving a really simple pain, but what we did was we actually were making him an internal hero. Every single time he ran a campaign through us, it was a massive success. He would then go back to his company, like, look what I did with this. They were like, oh, that's awesome. I don't know how you did that. That's great. And in the end, because we kept on becoming a hero, eventually he kept on buying from us. And eventually we got a conversation with the president of marketing at this big company here. And we were like, wow, this is huge. Like, what do we do with this conversation here? There's a huge potential that we have here. But the insight that we then had there was kind of that this is, even though he's now within the same organization, this is the president of marketing. So we're going to talk to him a little bit differently, and he's going to understand a different kind of, he's going to have different motivations that he has. It kind of gets into more of the customer archetypes and knowing who your customer is. And so we started trying to pitch him a little bit more of the kind of the future of kind of social video and where it's going and where it could go. And because we had made his kind of marketing manager a hero so many times, eventually making his department a hero so many times within the organization, he was like, you know what, I really like what you guys are doing, and I actually want to invest in you guys by giving you an upfront of like the next 20 movie deals that we have coming in. And that kind of is the example of kind of getting a customer evangelist loving you so much to the point where they almost want to invest in you. And if you can find ways to do that, oftentimes making them internal heroes in whatever way you can. It's kind of what we were saying, why sometimes we'll go out of our way and we'll spend some money to do editorial coverage on a video, even though it's not in the contract anywhere, because we know it'll make them a hero inside the company. And when you do that, you win them as a customer advocate, you win them as an evangelist of what you do. And so today, we are now hiring up a sales team, but we've done over like 300 different campaigns with all those brands without a formal sales team in place, but just my co-founder and one sales guy just on the pavement walking around, because all of our leads have just been inbound. It's everyone saying, I love what you've done with this video, or we've heard from our friend, and so we just get requests from there. And now we're at the point where we're like, all right, now we can go out and start handling some of that and start drumming up our business.
That's really really fascinating point. And how would you characterize? Sorry. How would you characterize those people, those early evangelists? Are those part of your sort of influence network that you have to leverage for your platform, or?
So I think what we would categorize them. So initially, they're usually the early users. They're usually my next slide's appropriate for this. So they're actually in the kind of the technology adoption life cycle. For those of you who know this kind of language, this is kind of the technology adoption life cycle. You have a lot of the innovators are kind of people who are just on the bleeding edge, sitting on the way left. And kind of as a startup, what you want to get to, it's pretty easy to get to here, but this is what they call the chasm. You want to cross here to get to the mainstream, these two being the mainstream. And that's kind of the challenge you have. And what we found was a lot of the early we spoke with were innovators and kind of the early adopters. And sometimes you'll find...
Are these your customers that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Or the people you're sending videos to?
No, these are paying customers.
Sorry.
And that's the other thing you have to recognize.
Okay.
Customers are people who give you money, not people who give you money. And a lot of people get it confused. So if you figure that part out first, you're there a lot sooner.
Since we're talking about customers, on your previous slide, you said about customer archetypes. Is that related to the persona conversation that Keith and I had?
Yeah.
If you can.
I'll talk about. Someone had a question about kind of the advertising marketplace, and I took a picture of kind of a good talking point about that as well. So I told you kind of two of those, kind of lean principles of like an MVP and talking to your customers and really learning about them. And so, once we started getting traction as a company, we wanted to figure out how to kind of institutionalize it and kind of go through this kind of adoption life cycle and grow. Go ahead.
did you start monetizing your customers very early on, or where your whole focus was just to get large key customers under your belt?
No, we were. So that's another thing about an advertising company is it was all about monetization, and because we're dealing with cash, there's always they pay us money to get video views on it, and we pay publishers on it. So we always had money coming in. That was one of one of the key differences between a kind of services startup versus a kind of consumer-based startup. So we were always monetizing. I think that's one of the things I haven't covered in another slide about the interesting points about a service-based startup is that you get cash really early on, and it can confuse the hell out of what is important and what's not important.
Second follow-up to that question, because some of these ideas were very new at that time, social video, still very experimental, how did your early customers maybe open their pockets up to something very new because they had their own budgets and whatnot?
So, what Chris touched about that problem, like we happened to come upon a problem that they actually have is, and it was through, they wouldn't necessarily it was through a lot of experimental budgets that we were kind of getting our foot in the door. And so they create this cool new content, they post it on YouTube, and they're like, crap, how do I get people to watch it? And so that's the main problem that we were kind of solving initially. And with that, we then kind of were betting on also the fact that the trend is that brands are going to start producing more and more kind of what we call long-form entertaining content. And by doing so, there's going to be more and more demand for this type of content for people to want to get views onto it. And a way to make it more predictable and scalable and
When we were first starting out doing this, was there, I kind of just did a pricing model.
Yeah.
So there kind of like an established, like this, 1,000 views is worth X dollars.
Pricing was the hardest thing that we always struggled with, because it was like, what do we charge? We just quadruple the price and will they still buy it? I don't know. And we were worried, so I was like, do we go out and test one price here to them and another price here? And I think what we did, we would kind of test it, and it never felt right to do it, but we would test it here and there. And one of the things we did, which we had the luxury of doing, was we worked with a sales rep and firm. What they do is that they'll sell upon our behalf. And these were, they're like an expert sales team, the top-notch sales team. And so our kind of hypothesis going into it was like, well, we want to test different pricing models. And sure, we might be able to shout out a random number and they'll say yes or no. But if we're not professional, we'll always discount that because we'll just say, oh, we're not a professional sales team, we can't do it. So we looked to find a sales rep firm who was a professional sales team. We let them kind of hike up the price, like hugely, double the price, and they went out and sold it. And they sold successfully. And even though at that point we were basically giving them like 50% of everything, but what that did, and eventually we kind of ended the relationship, and it was amicable ending. But what we learned from that was that, well, they tested that out for us in a way that we would have never been able to test it out, and we were able to say, hey, we can double our price. Now we can sell it double the price to the right people, and we know that if we hire a crack sales team, they'll be able to sell it for us, versus us having to kind of hire the sales team, which is a really scary kind of, or everyone paints it as a really scary endeavor.
What was the name of the sales team?
They were called App Savvy. So I'm going to go through these next few slides are kind of about, this is kind of what I was talking about, some of the pictures of the things we have in our office. So what we've done, this used to be, we recently moved offices, it used to be on a big, massive whiteboard, and this used to surround the corner. What we have here are two types of customer archetypes. We have creative agencies and then media agencies. And at each of these levels, there are different levels, and they all kind of, this shows who they report up to. And in each of these levels, what we talk about what their role is, what they're motivated by, what they're influenced by, what their day-to-day responsibility is. And by doing so, when we have our conversations, we can kind of talk about whose pain we're solving at the moment, and then if we're creating like a sales or marketing deck, we can say who are we really targeting, and who are we trying to get, what are we trying to motivate them by. And so what you have, we try and get really specific, because you want to, get a picture, get a name, and you want to get it to the point where we're having our conversations in just like company context. You can point to a person and be like, Zach wants this, or Zach wants that.
So are you out of the experimental budget at this point or not?
Yeah, we're out of the experimental budgets. but we're still growing budget size.
Okay. My question really related to that is there even an experimental budget in 2010 like there was in 2007?
There always will be experimental budgets, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, they're always trying to find.
I'm trying to figure out what you're facing in 2010 versus 2007 in terms of money flow.
Yeah.
Willingness to spend.
Yeah, our challenges are much more about kind of getting out to the world and letting them know about the solution that we have for this problem.
Can you go into detail on some, maybe one of the archetypes and maybe how you built that archetype?
Yeah. So I think an interesting insight that we got out of this was, so early on, I think there were some questions about kind of how did we get the early traction, and who was this early traction from? And some of it was from kind of experimental budgets, and some of it was also from kind of this creative agency archetype. And what we found was, before this, we had no ad experience, and what we learned was the way the agency world works is there's a brand, and the brand kind of will outsource the content creation to someone, and then the content distribution to another agency. And so you have these two branches of the creatives, which is the creative agency, and then the media agencies, which handle all the distribution. We were just kind of taking money from wherever initially, and what we noticed was all the money was initially coming from creative agencies. Creative agencies are very different, and they actually do have the more flexibility to kind of spread money in an experimental way, and they actually are all about kind of hero creation, making people within their own kind of companies a superstar for getting the word out. Yeah.
So just so I'm clear, you found that going after the creative agencies was the correct path?
Yeah, that was through, we didn't realize it until we did kind of exercise and realized, well crap, like 80% of creative agencies, love us and work with us and they know us. But the bigger insight was that all the money and the billions of dollars of advertising is controlled by the media agencies. So we were like, great, creative agencies love us, but in order for us to scale this company, we got to move over to and get the media agencies and get them from buying from us. And so the insight that we had there was, because we were able to split them out very distinctly, we were able to figure out kind of some of the different motivations the creative agency has and different motivations the media agencies have. And the media agencies have the same goals for what kind of Chris was talking about, was the transparency, reliable, scalable, all that stuff. Whereas creative agencies, they don't have that concern as much. And so for us to really kind of start moving over to the media agencies, we needed to start building our product and in such a way that kind of solved those kind of requirements that they had in there to do business.
And so did you go into demographics and psychographics in terms of, like you have your creative director Chuck.
Yeah.
Is that sort of the, what kind of clothes he wears, what's on his mind?
We didn't get like deep into like psychographic, but we got enough to kind of understand what they're motivated by, who are they motivated by. So it's like what publications they might read. So you kind of get the idea of, well, in order to, Steve Blank told us this kind of story, he calls it, you want to fuck with their head. And in order to fuck with their head, you got to figure out what they read and kind of who they're talking to. He had this really great story that he told us, and I think he was in a company called, I think it was MIPS. Do you know what hardware company he was in? It was a company called MIPS, and they were a no-name kind of chip manufacturing. And he had to go against Intel, I think another big name brand, and the way he did it was like he knew that he had to mess with the minds of kind of the people who buy these chips, and he knew that those people read the Wall Street Journal. So what he did, he went to Wall Street Journal and kind of broke a news story about kind of Intel, another one, and MIPS, and no one knew who the hell MIPS was. But when everyone read this news article, they were like, holy crap, MIPS is a real player because I see him next to Intel. And that story was all based on Steve Blank kind of pushing that kind of concept and breaking that news to them. And that was that's his like kind of crowning achievement of kind of fucking with people's minds. But I think that is very true. Kind of as a startup, you're always looking for those kind of little ways to kind of get in and get into the people's mind share. And one of the things we did really well was by working with the creative agencies. What the other kind of nice thing about the way this kind of works together is creative agencies kind of can push for companies that they want the media agencies to work with. So what ended up happening is at the top of the chain, it's the same person. The brand marketer sits on top, and so the creative agencies would work. They tell the brand marketer, "Oh man, Sharethrough is awesome. I keep on using it; they're great." The brand marketers will wait a minute, like my distribution budget is managed by the media side. They should get involved in this. So they start putting pressure back down the chain, and then when it goes back down the chain, they come back to us. So we're kind of getting people from here up back to them, and then we make the lead into media. we kind of then solve there. And this kind of really understanding our customer, I think, has helped us kind of get to the point where we can have conversations like these and really be very clear about whose pain are we going to solve.
Really fascinating for two reasons. One is you usually see this in the UX discipline,
Yep.
not as a sales process. I mean, I've heard about archetypes when you make a UI. I've never heard about archetypes when you're selling it to someone. That's fascinating. Second thing is, how often do you update these things? You're obviously learning about it. Like, so you make the archetype, and it's sort of a guess of what motivates them. So how frequently in the early process and then later on did they mature at a certain point and you get to really know them? Or?
Yeah, so I think this is the one thing that we're guilty of is we haven't updated this in a very, very long time. But the ideal world is that we would constantly update it. But I think in some sense just doing, and this is kind of the almost like MVP concept, but if you just get a basic thing up there, it'll carry you really far until one day we'll look at it and be like, wait, this is completely wrong. But fortunately, the media world doesn't change very rapidly. And because it doesn't change that much, these roles are pretty much set in stone quite a lot. And motivations are probably still the same. People are all climbing ladders all over the place. And, so I think we have the luxury of not having to change this regularly. I would say in the more consumer world, as you discover more, you'll see kind of the market change. You'll see kind of new niches form. So it's not going to be as clear cut. I'd argue that this, you probably get more specific here and like break it down even more, but we haven't.
How did you do the research for your archetypes, or did you have any focus groups in the early stages?
It's funny. A lot of this stuff was because just early on we were out the door all the time. Because when it came down to this, it was actually pretty straightforward, and mostly straightforward. We just had enough friends in the industry at that point. We'd be like, hey, can you tell us who's your boss? Who do you work with? And okay, cool. And then you have a conversation with them, and you have a meeting with them. You look down at their desk, you see what they read, you see kind of what they're interested in, you see what's on their screen. You kind of do a little bit of that, and you get an understanding of kind of who they are. And so there's some of that you got to do early on, but a lot of it comes from just, or if you already know your customer, you can kind of start, I'm sure all of you can probably do a little bit of this now, and where there are your holes, that's where you get your feedback.
I did some of this my last startup, not quite as sophisticated, but I kind of fell into this because it kind of comes out of customer development. Very powerful for the organizations we were dealing with, for example. We always had it happened to be 8 times out of 10, young 40-something male with an MBA is usually the head of the organization, and then generally speaking, like a mid-30s level female, usually unmarried, reported to him. And you can vastly different sort of mindset, influences, and vastly different reality.
Yeah.
I really,
I mean, the other great thing about this is when we actually do product features, we can say, who is this for? Is this for Rose over there, or is it for Chuck over here, or is it for Zach over there? And we can kind of be really specific about who we're building this for. So there's no kind of debate about who's going to use this? Why are we doing this? What's the point of this?
Some of the publishers are.
That's because they're not our customers. We pay them. They pay us. So the first thing for us was to figure out how to tap into the people that pay us. And once we have the cash, giving cash away is pretty easy. Not easy, but it kind of falls into place. So
You didn't have any resistance with publishers?
Not really. I mean, people want to find ways to monetize their site, and we are able to monetize their site in ways that are very unique and interesting. They kind of break the mold of standard advertising, so we've been successful at that. But that is our next step, and one of our to-dos, burning my mind, is to do. All right, so that's kind of the customer archetype board. Here's just some other practices we have. We pair program on all of our stuff just from the engineering side. So we do Agile, closer to XP, so we pair program in all of our stories. You see our workstations here. We do daily Scrum. We rotate our pairs frequently, which means kind of everyone ends up touching everything in all of the codes. So it kind of creates a kind of a feeling of a joint code base, and everyone can touch everything, and enables you to really do kind of pulling from the backlog really easily. Play a lot of ping pong.
How much of pair programming do you actually do?
We pair program everything.
So they're working on the same application?
We have one monitor with 2 keyboards.
Yeah.
And they're working on whether it's a bug, whether it's a feature, whether it's kind of system level stuff, all types of things.
How big is your team currently?
So we currently are a 6-person team, and it's not enough, and we're looking to hire. We're actually 3 of them are consultants from Pivotal Labs. And so we're kind of ramping them off, trying to bring in our own team as well.
Do you pair more senior people with more junior people, or do you?
The pairing is done. So, sorry. In this kind of morning scrum, at the end of the scrum, you kind of pick out who pairs with who. And a lot of times, it's not necessarily about senior to junior. It's more about like knowledge. Oh, you've been working on this. You know a lot about it. You don't know anything about it. You guys should probably pair, so that there's kind of spread of knowledge.
Did you have full-time engineers in the beginning, or?
Yeah, we had full-time engineers from the start.
From the start?
Yeah.
Isn't that really expensive?
What, pair programming?
Pair programming and from
So yes, pair programming, or Pivotal is very expensive, which is why we're ramping them down. We only used them for about like 2 months or so. Pair programming actually, it seems on the upfront more expensive because it's 2 resources working on one thing, but you'd be surprised at how many mistakes are caught, how much better quality there is, how less time is spent kind of churning the wheel, and how less time is spent kind of just like you're stuck somewhere at Google and get lost in kind of the world of the internet for about an hour. It doesn't happen at all when you pair program.
What about burnout?
Could I'm really enjoying the way this is going, and we hit 8 o'clock, so we promised you guys that we would go from 7 to 8. So I just want to pause for a second just to sort of say, some people may have commitments after this, and they were expecting we'd go to 8. I'm personally, I'm digging this conversation and could go on, but I don't want to be rude about it. So I just wanted to ask you guys if you think we should continue a little longer or try to wind it down a little bit and then take the conversation to the networking part of it. We're here from 8 to 10. Okay, so, and no offense, we continue it here, we're going to continue over beers out there. Maybe out beers too, but. So how many people want to just sort of continue here for a longer time?
How many more slides do you have today?
10.
We personally did an experiment. We weren't sure what the audience was going to be like. We tried to do a little custom development at the beginning of the thing, so we weren't really sure what you guys would be interested in. Usually we have kind of a preset deck, and so we kind of agreed beforehand to kind of wing it a little bit and sort of let it flow from your questions. So that's why we haven't been super rigid. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's an experiment. So let's continue.
How about like a 10-minute beer break?
That is a genius idea.
Actually, I think we have good flow right now.
Yeah, so individual, if you want a beer,
Rob, keep going.
if you want a beer, help yourself and come back. And then we're going to keep on going at least for another half an hour, maybe?
This audience looks pretty engaged to me, so let's keep hammering it off on this.
Cool. So there's questions about burnout. Burnout actually can happen when you pair program just because it's so intense. So we actually there are pretty set hours that the engineers work, so they end up working from 9 to 6, which is something that we're working with and we're committing to saying that's what we're going to work on, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's kind of part of what we do is kind of a lean startup, and we're going to iterate and learn from it. So far, it's been working well. We're getting a great kind of morale and happiness, and then as well as we're getting productivity and output out of them as well. That I think would be as good as if we had individual engineers working like all hours as much as they can.
And do you have I've always been trying to advocate that in the organization. Rarely have not been able to successfully do that. Sorry, I lost my train. Do you have any metrics, showing those improvements, other than kind of like a holistic sense of yes, this is cool and better?
Yeah, I don't think we've gotten the metrics just yet. It's kind of easier when I'm the decision maker and I decide that I feel like this is the right way to do it. I think as a whole, the company is we're just more about kind of not burning people out, but more kind of just like a sustainable pace and a scalable pace. So I think, because of that mentality exists, it's kind of it's easier for it to get bought in by everyone.
With you being an engineer yourself, and then you having other engineers come in, and you said you're ramping up, so you're bringing in new engineers. What do you do? Do you actually give them specs, or do you let them work on the design?
They jump right into the pairs. So they just sit down next to someone and they just start working with them.
But do they actually come up with their own designs and bring something to the table? Or do they go work for work?
They jump right in with them and they start kind of operating at the same level as everyone else.
It's pretty loose.
So here are some kind of the key learnings that I have from kind of the way we've institutionalized customer development, agile development. Essentially, we want everyone in the company. It's kind of we talk about customer development all the time in the company. So everyone understands customer development, and everyone kind of does some customer development themselves. During training, so the 2 pillars of the company essentially, the company makes money by kind of salespeople going out and making deals and talking in the relationships we have. Then the actual way we actually then deliver the campaign out to them. So those are the kind of the two core parts of our company, and part of our training, we want everyone to be familiar with how those two parts of the company work. And even the engineers got to understand how that works, because otherwise they end up kind of building in a silo. We do a lot of things to kind of avoid the silos. In agile development, kind of it's all about discipline. That's kind of something that we learned through kind of in the transition into it. But if you have good discipline, you can be loose in some ways as long as you have discipline in other ways. As I said, documentation work. Engineers work on the entire stack, and we don't really have much documentation for training because people jump into pairs and they start working on it. And because people are switching pairs all the time, people are careful to write code that's kind of easily readable. And continuous integration, we're trying to go toward continuous deployment, but as I'm sure people here have tried it, know it's very difficult to do.
When you're talking about discipline, is that restricted to coding, like writing?
Oh, no, I'm talking about process discipline. I'm talking about daily scrums, retrospectives, iteration planning meetings, that type of stuff.
And do you have a UX team? Like, how does that fit in?
Our UX team, actually, is a great segue to my next slide, which is kind of, Lean Startup is all about challenging assumptions. And, I think what we found, and some people when we were talking earlier today have noticed, is that, with there's customer development, there's kind of the agile programming or extreme programming, and they kind of work together, and that is the foundations of what you need for Lean Startup. I think what we're noticing is that there is a need for one other thing, which is kind of like some way to do design that fits within this iterative process, and it's not kind of, and it's not waterfall, because design tends to be very waterfall based. You make a mock, you form the entire mock, and you pass it off to the product team, and they'll break it into specs, and they'll break it into kind of iterative pieces that get built. And I think, as you kind of succeed in customer development and succeed in agile development, you then kind of have pressures that form around kind of design, and how do you make design work and function in the same pace that the entire company's now moving at. And so kind of what we've come upon is linear user design. It's not something we've invented. We're working with a former CEO of Adaptive Path. This is something that she's kind of preaching and pushing out a lot of these practices out there. And Janice, and she's come on as an advisor, and she's really helped us. And she has these workshops in San Francisco, and kind of we did one of them. And I'll go through kind of some of the tenets of kind of lean user design. One of the things is you communicate with visuals instead of words. And this kind of what this does. This creates a common language that everyone can speak. Designers have their own language that they speak, and business people have their own language, engineers have their own language. Agile kind of helped knock down some of those barriers, but then you're stuck with this design barrier. Designers using all these buzzwords of how they describe things. And while it's good to hear, it's reassuring to know a designer knows their words, it doesn't help the business move forward. So I think by just describing things with visuals, it helps kind of break down that barrier. Here's an example of kind of an exercise we did, which is, taking kind of the customer archetype exercise and kind of applying it into the design. You can then take the user, and this is kind of one of the users that we had on our archetype, and kind of figure out what her pains are and try and solve that pain. And out of that pain, we came up with a bunch of different features, and this is kind of a nice little matrix that helps kind of a prioritization kind of exercise you can do. It's very visual again, that helps everyone understand what the priorities are versus saying just look at the backlog, it's all in the backlog. Now everyone understands what's in the backlog. And then kind of low fidelity mocks to kind of solve the user pain, and that's something that my co-founder did this, not a designer at all, just with a big fat Sharpie drawing a lot of things, and with it we're able to talk through, and that's our actual Frankenstein of a bunch of different things that we had kind of put together that kind of was then like, wow, we have an actual thing that we can now pass off to a visual designer, and they can make it pixel perfect that we can go out and do kind of some customer development with. But I argue that we took that too far and went too much to a final thing, and then it got stuck in this waterfall state again. And so I think what we should have done there was broken it into a much smaller piece and just showed that piece to our customers. So again, stuff we're learning.
Can you talk about what you're actually coding? Because it's unclear to me if you guys are actually coding for like behavioral studying, or if you're actually coding like a video landing page.
So this is something that we're building towards that we haven't built yet, and that is kind of more of a video landing page that that users can kind of go to, or kind of our customers can use and kind of look at stuff. What we've built to date is a kind of a reporting platform, an analytics platform that our advertisers can come in and see how their campaign is performing, and what the metrics are, and what learnings they can glean from that. So this is something that we're working toward, that we want to build, that we have built to date.
So you guys define this as off-the-shelf product, you have to code custom?
Well, so part of this process is not necessarily a build versus buy decision. This is a, let's kind of see what cool stuff we can build for a customer that might solve their pain. And then in the actual process of let's build this, we'll look at it and be like, wait a minute, half this can be API. We might even have to build this. Someone's already done it. Let's just buy it and to do the analysis. But this isn't even up to that point yet.
Are you charging the customers for the development?
No, we're not.
Why not?
Because we have a nice profit margin that we get from our advertising. This is something that we've done in the office, and this is kind of talking more. I'm going to get more into kind of like how I think spatially setting up your office in a cool way really helps. And one of the things that the Stanford Design School has is they have these whiteboards that they've kind of built on clothing racks. And one, it's a lot cheaper than kind of buying it yourself, and you get to build them on your own, which is kind of cool. And so we built a bunch of these in our new office we just moved into. We've got 12 of them. So it lets you kind of do cool stuff like this. You kind of set them up all over the place. You can build little mini rooms with them. But this is kind of an example of us just having all of our designs up and out, so everyone can see. We have design conversations out there, so everyone can kind of get an understanding what's happening. So again, it's physical, visual, and just kind of transparent product communication, so everyone kind of understands what's going on.
Are you like restricted whatsoever with what you put up there? Because I can see that being kind of distracting in some environments.
No, I think we have dogs in the office. They're way more distracting than this stuff would ever be. So, yeah.
Maybe you should get rid of the dogs too.
It's funny, the dogs are actually a really strong part of our culture. We actually considered when we were looking for offices, like, should we find an office that's dog friendly? And it became ingrained as a part of kind of who we are. So
it's just relaxing. Because I know Facebook and Google doesn't do that.
With what, the dogs?
Yeah,
you see these gates all over the office here? So you'll notice, it's just an anecdote, you'll notice we have about, like it or not, about 5 or 6 dogs in here every day. I'm not exaggerating, we have 5 or 6. It's funny, it's like definitely a cultural thing. I think some people are like,
They're really good programmers too.
It creates more like a family atmosphere.
Yeah, definitely. This is kind of like a bird's eye view of the office. You just see all the boards all over the place. We like everyone co-located and like people just kind of shouting out across, just getting communication out there, because that communication is kind of what helps keep the flow of the process going.
Rob, quick.
Yeah.
Really quick. A setup like this, which appears to me to foster creativity and teamwork, do you think that's applicable in all situations? Because I can kind of for the gentleman's point back there. I can see this in a startup environment, a lot of fun, dogs shouting out. But that's kind of my nature as well. But in terms of perhaps when you guys are more mature, can this scale?
Yeah, but that's a key question. We like it to scale for as long as we can, and we're trying to find ways to do so. I think as you grow, you have to form more processes, and you have to figure out what the best way is to make everyone happy and to kind of allow it to grow, but in the same kind of keep it as organic as we have it now. But it's just something you take a risk on, something that we try and then you learn from it. You run your company, like it's a lean startup, you run your company in an iterative fashion, you learn from it.
Are there any offices?
We have conference rooms, but there's no offices. So for lean user design, I think the goal of the kind of concept of lean user design is iterative design, which is kind of a new concept and kind of foreign to kind of some of the people in the design community, and to get designers speaking and communicating on the same language. Some practices that we've yet to practice because we're hiring designers at the time, but that kind of we've learned from working with Pivotal and kind of through our advisor is kind of pair program with designers, having designers work with engineers, and that kind of helps get this common knowledge, so that designers can, if we don't know crap about the way HTML should be built or the way it should be structured, they can then hear from the designer's perspective and kind of start to understand it and work together on that. And communicate with visuals instead of words. And Luxor.co is kind of Janice Frazier's website and her entire kind of design residency.
So what I'm hearing is you don't have your designers yet, right? You're bringing them later on in the process.
Well, we're bringing one right now, but yeah.
You're bringing one right now, but how long was it before? Because we're looking to do the same thing. I don't think that we need a designer right away. I know an
So
engineer is not a designer.
Yeah, so in retrospect, I would have brought in a designer earlier on. There's some of it is because of the fact we're in kind of a very visual space and we're dealing with creative companies and media companies. And the way things look is actually really important to them. That's kind of, again, knowing your customer.
But it costs to bring a designer in.
It does, but the value we would have gotten from it, we could have probably done way more customer development sooner and faster without having to dedicate engineering resources to it, because we could have just done mock-ups and that would have been enough to do the customer dev without having to actually build any product.
Well, so you go back-end transparency tools as well, right? So
Yeah. So when it gets to the point where you actually need to show transparency, then you need engineering to do it. But there's some stuff where you could have done very easily just about kind of the way it looks or kind of the way they interact with it and the way they get their learnings from it.
So what you're saying is like early on as you're trying to get to an MVP or discover what that MVP is and you're doing custom dev, you're using really raw tools like crayons on napkins, whatever it takes to work with them. But then over time, as you start to validate what the problem is, you start going higher in fidelity, and then it's ready. It's time to start burning engineering time and stuff like that.
And I almost see it in the same way, kind of the way you set the backlog. The backlog, as closer to now, is very fine, very granular. But the further down the list you get, the more kind of broad it gets. And it's kind of the same way with the process. The earlier in the process, it's really kind of just high level and really low fidelity, and as you get closer to when you're actually going to build something, you got to get higher and higher fidelity. All right, so one slide about kind of lean advertising, or a lean advertising startup versus a standard startup, and I touched upon this a little bit before, is Eric Ries, one of the founder leaders of the space, kind of wrote a great post about vanity metrics and how you can say, I've got 1 million users and isn't that great, but that might not mean anything for your website or for kind of the long-term goals of who you are. And in an advertising startup or even a services startup, cash can be the vanity metric because it can really kind of distract you from what is really important. While cash is king, obviously, and cash what keeps going. Just because you have a lot of cash doesn't mean you're building long-term equity value. And I think it's kind of the same thought of just getting lots of users. It doesn't necessarily mean getting lots of users equals long-term equity value. The other thing about kind of an advertising startup is like, we just have to build for web scale immediately. We have to deal with millions of users and tons of data immediately. And I feel like in a consumer website, you can do it a little bit more incrementally, and you kind of build infrastructure as you need it. We kind of have to think about infrastructure as soon as we turn something on. That's been interesting, challenging that we've had. And it's, the common question of lifestyle versus venture scalable business. It's really easy to slip into a consultancy or an agency when you're kind of in the services business because cash is coming in. Yeah, it's happy, and you could probably make a good business, personal business out of it. But the question is, do you want to take it to a venture scalable business? And the last thing is just kind of summary of all of it. Figure out your customer archetypes. Do everything in terms of MVPs. And my one biggest thing, it's odd hearing this from a CTO, but technology is not the problem solver. Or as a problem solver, it's not the product. And so great technology by itself doesn't mean doesn't prove any business. And that's a tough pill to swallow for some people, but I strongly believe that. That's final slide.
What were you saying about consultancy and venture again? I didn't quite get it. Were you talking about it's easy to slip into being a consulting company, or
yeah?
What exactly were you saying?
Well, I mean, because we're dealing with customers on a day-to-day basis, and they're just saying, oh, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? It's really easy just to turn it into kind of a consultancy or like a one-off shop to do this.
Instead of focusing on your product.
Yeah, instead of building a product that can scale in a way where you can just hire a sales team that can sell versus like having like a consultant.
Oh, okay.
Can we get a copy of the deck?
Sure. Let me just go through and make sure that
we usually try to get the decks and publish on the SlideShare. So if you're open to that after going through and editing it how you see fit, we can send a link out to the group afterwards with the video as well.
Yeah, it probably won't be exactly like this. Probably nothing in here.
How do we see the product?
How do you see the product?
How do we see the product? Like we basically do an entire presentation.
Send us one.
We can watch a video. The product is kind of a login that our advertisers end up seeing, and we can show you pieces of it if you want.
So it's 8:20, and the more I think about this, the more this feels like a bar camp kind of unconference format. And what they do at bar camp when it's a loose agenda is they give everyone permission to come and go as they please. I don't think that's going to be too disruptive, but maybe we can keep this going a little bit longer. But I want to give you guys permission to go use the restroom, grab a beer, and don't feel bad about it.
So what about the Quora meetup after this?
So yeah, there's so decided on Thursday. Who's heard of Quora? Who is active on Quora? Okay, who's here because they heard about the Quora meetup? One person, 2 people, 3 people. You guys can come in. Come on. No, please come on in. So we decided to also invite local LA Quarrens. Are they called Quarrens? Is that how you pronounce it? Quarrens. So Quora community members. It's a really bright community of people, very sort of high-tech focused around this Q&A product. And this communities forum that's, I think, is super bright. This guy's a real active user on it, and I am too. So we invited those people to come. So they're going to be coming now and a little bit later. So, but again, give you guys permission, just use the restroom, grab a beer, and I think we're going to do questions a little bit longer. Or
I just want to see that video that Chris was talking
the video,
about. The amazing video.
Yeah, I can see the video. I can pick up the video and just try to great things just run in the background. The volume's going to be as loud as my computer can get.
You want to hold the microphone up to a speaker. Do you want to hold it? Can you guys hear that?
No.
All right, hold on.
Well, he's got a question.
What are we looking at?
So this is an interesting campaign. We had this campaign for an actual producer of video.
Check.
You wanted to kind of build his name. This is a video that he made to kind of get his name out, and this got extreme traction.
So this video, can you just kind of, I walked through it a little bit, so can you kind of walk me through the process? This video is playing on YouTube or something?
Yeah, so so this video, what you'll see is the way it kind of works around there is you'll be playing kind of like a social game, and you'll be in this social game. One of our partners is kind of a social game called Mall World. It's like a social virtual world where girls create stores and they put shopping racks in them and they build their stores that other people can go in there and spend money on. One thing I did put in the store is like a plasma screen. Now on this plasma screen, you click on it, video like this will pop up. That's the type of like integration that we're trying to build. So that's kind of
Who's the client?
This client is the producer. I forgot his name, but it's an actual producer's video.
So he's paying you.
The client, he paid you to
Get this
the
out.
advertiser paid you X amount to get this result.
How many views shares in this video?
3.7 million.
3.7.
Okay, so so just to summarize, the context of this is inside a social application, a game, and is that the main point of discovery for this video?
Well, it was also kind of, I think we ran some editorial on this, and we kind of wanted to flank it. Get a lot of buzz on this. You guys here?
No.
Far left.
You do coke and you kill people. That's wonderful, Tony. Am I going to fight jump for what?
21 times.
You son of a bee. I'm so pumped. I didn't know fighting would be with you. I'm leaving you, motherfucker. Little woman, but you know what I did. Sorry. That's what I'm doing, man. I got married to a sister.
That was awesome. I mean, you have to answer some questions about that video. Anyone want? I don't think anyone have any questions.
I just noticed it's got 14,000 likes, and then it's got 2,000 dislikes. How do you guys interpret things like that?
Well, I mean, it's in the internet, right? So there are going to be haters about it. You can't do anything about it, and that's one of the things that, you know, as kind of the client process, you have to manage that.
Remember we were talking about before? So it's like a thumbs down to me is passion, just as much as a thumbs up is passion. And you don't want people that are like, eh.
So this, real quick though, so your client said, hey, Rob, I want 1 million plus views on this. You X amount of money, and you said yes. Right? Is that roughly speaking, condensing it? That's what happened.
What do you mean say you ran a trail? What do you mean?
Oh, it's so you can kind of get like one of the bloggers and kind of other type of sites to get people to write articles about kind of this video and why it's out there, and that's a good way to kind of get press. It's more of a PR strategy in the marketing world.
And are you doing that internally, or do you have it like a firm?
We do it externally, and we'll do it on select campaigns and ones that we want to kind of have an extra type of buzz.
You typically use YouTube both as like the distribution platform and for tracking all the metrics.
We use YouTube
tracking on top of that.
We do our own tracking on top of it. YouTube. We use this kind of as a distribution platform. Every now and then we use other third-party sites, we'll have our own player that we'll use basically up to what the customer really wants. The one thing that they really like is this kind of public metric of success, another kind of customer development nugget that we learned. They love the public metric of success. So YouTube is the kind of, in a lot of marketing eyes, YouTube is the kind of is social video. So
is that the challenge? Do you need something like YouTube as the primary host of the video so you can measure? Because I assume if not, obviously that you can collect all the analytics and aggregate them into a comprehensive picture.
Early on, it was kind of, that was the case, but we were kind of we built some technology around this and that, our own kind of landing page that will allow us to kind of break out of this multiple.
Is that also aggressive range dilution issue?
What do you mean in terms of?
Post a video onto YouTube, it's actually Google. They actually may overlay a video ad.
Yeah. So I think that's part of kind of what they're okay with. Most of branches understand, like in this world of social video, like lots of things are kind of unknown and still figuring out. If it happens, we'll try to get it so that they don't run video assets on top of it or video ads on top of it.
But you really don't have control at the end of the day to make do a pre-roll, but that's, as long as the video gets 3 million views.
But actually, technically in YouTube, I think you do have control. As a user, if you put a video up, you can say, I don't want to make money off this, so don't run any ads.
Oh, so your company would get rev share if it was pre-roll running this?
Yeah, but that seems really weird to run advertising.
Well, I know. It's not like you intentionally do it. But
Yeah. I mean, but technically, I think it's not the thing.
Before you sold to like your first customers, did you have to put together like a sales forecast and outlining your product?
No, it was very kind of like, I'm going to figure out a way to sell and get something that they'll buy, and whatever it happens, happens. As we got funding and we started growing into a company, they were kind of asking us, what's your waterfall sales forecast? What the hell's a waterfall sales forecast? That's why we hired appropriately to help scale and all this stuff.
Did you read Steve Flight's book? He talks exactly about that. It's called Force of the Epiphany. Like they'll answer that question.
Is that in the whole lean?
Yeah. It's like the Bible.
So it's different than the standard way of actually.
Yes. Yeah. Steve Flight changed my life. So. I drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah. So kind of along those lines, you mentioned initially you're just trying to get those clients. You don't have the whole sales model. You don't have the projections. So, if I'm not mistaken, you guys did get funding.
Yeah.
So, at what point did you get funding? Where were you in terms of?
So we got 2 rounds of funding. We got an angel round of funding from Mike Nichols, which is now Floodgate, and he's a very entrepreneur-friendly. Sorry.
Can you say how much it was?
Yeah, I think it's on TechCon somewhere. We raised $1 million in our first angel round. In the end, we actually didn't need it per se to survive, but we needed to kind of scale and grow. And he's a very entrepreneur-friendly kind of angel. So even though we didn't know what we were doing at the time, he kind of helped us kind of push us in the right direction and figure it out. And then in our recent round with Northbridge, we kind of been formalized.
With your initial clients, how do you mitigate the risk of
the unknown number of views you'll get? Do you offer a refund, or what do you say? If,
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
well, basically, if we don't get the reviews that they want, we won't charge them for that.
So we're sorry to interrupt, but we're half an hour over, and you know, you want a power bar or some water or something. I'm not sure if we want to keep on going here. We should probably take a break and grab a beer.
Yeah, I'll be around.
So, what's that?
Yeah, I'll be around.
Okay,
So should we move to the?
Yeah, we're gonna relocate. There's plenty of beer, and I think there's some food left. So you guys are all welcome to hang out.